Hey guys, I am back and with Brad. Brad, again, he's on staff at Grace Chapel and he is a licensed counselor. And we're going to continue our talk about mental health and anxiety and all of that. If you haven't watched our part 1 video, stop this one and go back and watch that first. We talked a lot about the stigma of anxiety and mental health and how that can be an unhealthy view to have. Today, we're actually going to talk about what are the causes for people to have mental health concerns or anxiety or things like that. So what do you think? What are some causes that you've seen?
Well, what we talked about was, and you guys will see a graphic of like 3 circles that are all separate but yet overlap over each other. And so that represents kind of our makeup. So we are, of course, physical beings. We have bodies, we have genetics and genetic coding. We have cells that have imprints of genetic coding, and stuff can be passed on from parents. Of course, our body shape, sizes, all of skin color, all that obviously comes through genetics. And so some of our what we would consider mental health issues can be passed on as well. So we're physical beings, so there could be some physical reasons why we're predisposed to certain ways of thinking or feeling or chemical imbalances or things like that are purely physical. And then there's this whole circle of like emotional, mental, like our thoughts and our thinking, which is distinct because thoughts are not necessarily physical, but they obviously overlap with our physicality. So our brains contain our thoughts, but our thoughts are more than just physical. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so the way that we think can often cause mental health issues. So our beliefs, so that's where we get into things like lies that we believe about ourselves, or a concept of ourself. Like if we have a term called body dysmorphia, for example, where our bodies might be just fine, but we think that we're ugly, or we think that a body part is like wrong, too big or too small or off or something like that. And then once our thinking changes, we'd no longer have that problem, even though our body didn't change. Does that make sense? So that's like a emotional, mental kind of realm, but they overlap. And then you have spiritual, that we are all, from a Christian perspective, we are all spiritual beings. And so obviously that has a lot to do with our thinking and our beliefs, but it also has to do with our bodies, because like even the bodies that we have now, like the Bible says, we will be resurrected and have new bodies. So it's not like our spirituality is totally separate from our bodies. They do overlap, as with our thoughts. So it could be from one of those spheres, like primarily. It could be from 2 in combination, or it could be from all 3. So it's a really complicated answer to where does mental health issues come from, or where do they come from?
Plethora of areas.
And so it really takes, part of my job is to try and help people understand where their particular problem comes from, because that determines what we then do in response to it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, actually, why don't we pause the video and turn to your groups. I want you guys to ask this question or just discuss this idea of those 3 areas: physical, emotional, and spiritual. What area of your well-being are you the most prone to take care of? And is there one of those 3 areas that Brad just talked about that maybe you're realizing you need to spend a little bit more time taking care of yourself in? And we'll be right back. So, Brad, you are a licensed counselor, so you automatically help people with the emotional bubble. Like, that's where, in my brain, that's where I categorize you initially, like counselors. But you're also a pastor and a very passionate follower of Jesus. So, can you talk a little bit about how do we reconcile things like mental health and being a Christian, and how does God fit into that whole experience?
Yeah, well, like we talked about in the first time, there's kind of the error of both sides, both looking at it as a stigma, like, oh, I have mental health, there's something horribly wrong with me, or I'm broken, especially from a Christian perspective. Like, Bible says don't be anxious, and you're anxious, so bad Christian, right? You shouldn't be anxious. or you shouldn't worry or be depressed or things like that. And so we can go to that extreme, really getting down about it. And then the other extreme we talked about was like wearing it like a badge and almost like, well,
this is who I am.
You're right, this is who I am. Or in Christian circles, it can be like, well, I'm only human. And so almost like not allowing God to maybe minister to that area because it's how I, identify as a human being. So we don't want to fall to either of those extremes. Okay, but then there's a situation where maybe someone is diligently trying to pursue healing or help for their anxiety. And since we're using that one, it's so common, so it's good that we're using it. So like, to me, it's kind of like that. There's a story in the Bible about Jesus being asleep in the boat as the disciples are crossing across the Sea of Galilee. And there's a large storm that comes up, and some of these guys are like seasoned fishermen, as we know. And they start really freaking out. I mean, it's not like just the people that hadn't been on boats were uncomfortable. Like, everybody is believing this is the big one. And Jesus is seemingly asleep in the boat, and it offends the disciples because, I think that they believed he was faking it, because they get mad at him. They're like, Master, why are you sleeping? Or why aren't you helping us? So anyway, he gets up and he says, peace be still. And immediately the storm is calmed. Then he turns to them and he says, where is your faith? And they said, who is this that even the wind and waves obey him? And what a pastor helped me see is that they asked the wrong question at the wrong time. So after the storm was calm, they asked the question, wow, who is this that even the wind and waves obey him? What they should have asked before he awoke was the question, who is this that the wind and waves don't wake him? So wait a minute, how is he able to sleep through this when we're freaking out here? Okay, and so he was trying to teach them faith. So in his back pocket, so to speak, he could get rid of the storm just like that. He knew that. He was testing their faith because he said, we're going to go to the other side of the lake. Well, where Jesus says we're going to go, we're going to go. They should have learned that, right? Well, they doubted that because the storm came up. Something unexpected or uncertain came up, and they experienced anxiety. Okay? So in life, we may experience anxiety, okay? And Jesus can calm that anxiety. He can get rid of it. There's testimonies of people that have struggled with anxiety or other major mental health diagnosable disorders, and for some reason, at some point, they're completely healed. Like, I know a kid that, I don't know if you guys have heard of Tourette syndrome, but it's very debilitating, and it's a neurological disorder, and he had ADHD severely, and he was in special education and all this. And I met him as an adult and want to know his story because he's a gifted guitar worship musician guy. And I was hearing his story, and he said, and he's talking to me normal and all that. And he's like, a year ago I was delivered in one, like someone laid hands on him. He was cured of Tourette's, cured of ADHD and all these other things. And he was leaving the church, in fact, to go to Bible college. And it was just a radical thing that happened to him. And so, just like that, Jesus can take away your mental health issue. Or he could see if you have faith to believe him in the midst of a mental health issue. So it reminds me of an old Jeremy Camp song. Like, I don't know if anybody knows who that is anymore. He's an old dude. I think he's like married now and has kids, so he's totally irrelevant. But anyway, he has a song. Sometimes he calms the storm, sometimes he calms his child. And I think that's a good metaphor for Christians who have mental health disorders. Is yes, God may have a plan to get you healed of some sort of mental health diagnosis or something like that. Sometimes, though, he may want to grow you and mature you as a believer, even if you continue to have a certain struggle mentally or something that would show up as a mental health diagnosis. Similar to some people get healed physically, and some people have an injury or a disease and they don't get healed physically, but God does miracles in their life and draws near to them in special ways. And they wouldn't, I've heard people say, I wouldn't take my cancer back because of everything that God was to me during that time. And I wouldn't regret it, or I wouldn't want to do it any other way. I'm going, that's amazing to me. So anyway, that's kind of how I look at it, or try to help others look at it as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I don't know, just as an encouragement to you guys, if you have anxiety or a friend, I just want to say thank you, Brad. All this information is so helpful, either for me to process it for my own self or for me to think about the relationships I'm in and how can I maybe support a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But what I definitely just heard you say is if you do have mental health issues of any kind, whether or not God heals you is not some sort of show of how much he loves you. Like, God loves you 100%, and he may heal you or he may not, but it doesn't change the way that he feels about us.
Yeah, I think the important thing for any of us to hear, regardless of what it is that we're praying for God to take away, is that he says with all kindness in his voice, my grace is sufficient for you.
Yeah.
And it is a big trust me, believe in me. Don't believe the lie that I'm somehow not good because I'm choosing to withhold something that I could easily do, similar to the waves. I could calm the waves. But if I choose not to, you still have to trust me. And I think if we can just hear Jesus literally telling us, like my grace is sufficient, you'll be okay. Everything's going to be fine. As if the storm was calm, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I love that. In our next video with Brad, we are actually going to talk about how do we walk 100% in the grace of Jesus? How do we walk in wholeness with the one who created us? So thank you again, Brad, and we will see you guys in the next video. Bye.
Thank you.